All right, we're back here in studio. We got attorney Anthony Rickman in studio with us here on the Consumer Quarterback Show. J6, we're going to talk about local cases, also sexting, 120 people arrested, and also an increase in traffic fatalities. We're going to talk about that and some of those implications as well with attorney Anthony Rickman here on the Consumer Quarterback Show. Before we do, we always like to feature a couple of our hot listings here. Strategy is to help sellers sell faster for more money, maximum exposure, maximum profit. 7202 US Highway 301 South in Riverview. We've got a commercial property, corner lot location, 50,000 vehicles a day passing by. Two separate structures. You got a 1,200 square foot barber shop and almost 1,800 square foot auto repair business. 2-in-1 right there for you. Commercial property, 7202 US Highway 301 South in Riverview, Florida. One of our commercial listings from the Platinum MVP team at Keller Williams Realty. All right, we got a single family home, 15900 Oakcrest Circle. This one's in Brooksville. Now, this Oakcrest Circle, what I like about these properties up north is you get a lot more bang for your buck in a sense. You're in Pasco County, you're in Brooksville. This is Oakcrest Circle, 4 bedrooms, 2 bath, 3-car garage. This is a large lot, large rooms, 3-car garage, beautiful property, sprinkler system, generator, newer hot water heater, AC. And what I like about this generator is it's a propane generator wired into the electrical system. So you're already ready to go in case you have power outages. 15900 Oakcrest Circle in Brooksville. You can see all of our listings at PlatinumCoastalElite.com. Check out PlatinumCoastalElite.com.
This is God's country.
All right, Anthony Rickman, welcome back, buddy.
Thanks for having me back.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good stuff, man. So we just had the J6, you know, and it's like every time I think about J6, I think about Fed surrection. I think about the insider stuff. You had Ray Epps, you know, with some, he got basically nothing. He got probation, very small fee. Let me start with this clip and then I'll get your take on it. But this is a quick clip from the Daily Wire.
Well, it was hardly a surprise that President Biden used the anniversary of January 6th to make a political statement of his own, but the rhetoric that he used was what really had people talking. The speech marked Biden's first campaign event of the election year and saw some of his most aggressive language towards Trump and his supporters since he took office.
Donald Trump's campaign is about him, not America, not you. Donald Trump's campaign is obsessed with the past.
Biden's campaign is about nothing that he's done because he's done nothing good. You know, it's like,
well, you talk about obsessed with the past. We're 3 years later, and we're still talking about what happened 3 years ago, January 6th, and we're still making arrests.
Exactly.
You know, the FBI is still making arrests for people accused of different types of things regarding January 6th.
Yeah.
And you talk about Ray Epps. He was recently prosecuted finally. The government actually came down hard. They wanted an incarcerative sentence, a jail sentence of like 6 months, but ultimately he didn't get anything near what some of the other people were accused of in January 6th, in connection with January 6th, what they got. And we see 20-year sentences now on the people accused of the Oath Keepers, the alleged insurrection cases. So
it's ridiculous.
You know, when you talk about it, there's different classes of people. You have people like who are accused of sedition, the alleged Oath Keepers, the Oath Keepers, people who allegedly had a plan to overthrow the government.
Right.
Then you have the people who went in maybe for a good, what they believe to be a good purpose, who got crazy, went in the Capitol, shouldn't have been in there, and they're charged for entry. Right. And then you have the people who are charged for being violent. And I think anyone across the aisle would agree that you should be hitting cops with flagpoles. I mean, you shouldn't be involved in the violent portion that we see on some of the body camera. But not everyone was like that. And if you see in the release,
but they were
escorted.
They were shot the powder. What's the stuff where you shoot it into the crowd? The gas,
the pepper sprays.
Yeah, so they were incited is the word I'm looking for. So they don't see that with the Pelosi sham. But so anyways, some of these people, it's like they start shooting this stuff at them, they're going to get pissed off.
Well, and you don't see the people. What we didn't hear until very recently, the release of the tapes, is the people walking through being escorted by Capitol Police. Talking to the police, really looking around inside the Capitol. Looking at our nation's capital, and they're also charged. So really, we saw recently we arrested these 3 individuals. These are 3 people who were accused of being part of that alleged violent uprising, being involved in hitting officers, stealing their riot gear, the riot shields. 2 of these newly arrested defendants were previously arrested, cut off their ankle monitors, were in hiding for 3 years, and then found with one of the individuals who the FBI has been looking for since January 6th.
Wow.
And they were all found locally here in Groveland. Northern part of the state, but originally they're from the Polk County area. And now we'll see how their case progresses.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. And then also with the Gretchen Whitmer, Michigan case, didn't they find that the FBI agents were giving them, here's a prepaid $5,000 spending card, go buy whatever you need?
Yeah, look, we know
that's entrapment, right?
In that case, we see the government's action.
Yeah.
Did it rise to the level of legal entrapment? In some of the cases, I think some of them actually didn't go forward.
Yeah.
But when you look at the activities and the actions of the government, that's why it's important to get an attorney. Because not everything what you see, not everything that's presented that the government presents is really what happens. The narrative, a lot of times what entrapment essentially is, the government creates a crime, gives you all the elements, gives you all the instrumentality, and ultimately you commit that crime you normally were not going to commit or be predisposed to commit.
Yeah, or have the capacity to.
And look, we were talking, you segued into talking about some of these sex cases. And I see it a lot in these sexting cases where people are on the internet looking for adults, and then law enforcement seeks them out. They engage in conversations on their ad on the website, whatever it may be, where they're 18, they're over 18, they're 25, and then hours later in the conversation, oh, by the way, I'm 15, 16, but at the time they've already sent out pictures of adults. They've already engaged in conversations. So you see cases like that also of entrapment on the sex side, on all types of cases. On drug cases, I've seen it. So it's not really relegated to what we saw with the government in January 6th, political cases, the Gretchen Whitmer cases. We see it a lot in my case that I handle, and what we do is we're checking the government as defense attorneys. We're making sure the government doesn't violate your rights or coerce or convince people to commit crimes that they didn't commit or weren't going to commit.
Let me ask you something. As a criminal defense attorney, I know you're licensed in other states. Do you really feel like, as a conservative, you can get a fair trial in D.C.?
You hope to, and look, and when you talk about a fair trial, and that's what jury selection is for. Right. When you talk about, as a conservative, in a January 6th type scenario, in a case where you are, where it happened in the backyard, it's very tough to seat a good jury. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of the defendants went non-jury, that they waived their right to a jury trial, and they had a trial with the judge only, because the judge is supposed to be a bench trial. The judge is supposed to be free from bias, and ironically, a lot of the attorneys who elected bench trials, a lot of defendants who elected those bench trials, they elected them in front of conservative appointees, as opposed to rolling the dice and going in front of a jury, where we know D.C. tends to be liberal. The veneer or the jurors you're going to bring in are going to be more liberal. They don't like what happened in their backyard, regardless of their political stance, and it's very hard. And the way it was
portrayed on the news,
and the way it's portrayed, yeah. So you talk about the biggest jury tampering, the biggest taint on a juror is the biggest story in the history of our media, of our country, right? It's January 6th.
Yeah, exactly.
And especially the fact that it was only portrayed in one particular way. And if you try to say, well, this is actually what happened, this is what the video showed, this is what the evidence shows on some of these cases, you're looked at as fringe, as not being somebody who's understanding what really happened.
Well, here's something too that we could utilize. This is Judicial Watch. They filed a suit around the J6 to release the J6 video. This is Tom Fitton. He's a patriot, and he says, there's a quote he says at one point here. He says, "In what world is it okay to shoot a woman unarmed?" Talking about Ashley Babbitt. I'm going to play this clip too.
We're fighting this Republican Congress to gain access to all the videos. They don't want to give us any videos under law. We appreciate that he's releasing videos. I'm not sure what he's doing or how quickly it's being released, because there's no way of checking it, because it's being done, just based on what he's decided to do recently. But they're opposing in federal court, working with the Biden Justice Department to oppose us getting these records. There are emails showing.
Why would they do that?
Yeah.
Right?
Because they don't want the other side being out there.
Exactly.
And when you talk about Ashley Babbitt, you talk about that particular situation, a new video was just released last week.
Really?
And on that video, you can see the officer pointing the gun through a closed door at her. Let's talk about that in terms of what I see on a daily basis, or what we see as citizens, right?
Right.
There was a case recently where a woman was afraid someone was going to break into her house.
Right.
And she shot through the closed door, killing somebody on the other side. And that person wasn't going to break in their house. The person wasn't going to commit a crime against her. But she thought they were. Right. Based upon some issues she had with neighbors. And she was charged with murder. Right. No one actually entered the house. No one broke the threshold. No one broke the barrier. You can't shoot through a door.
Where was that at? Was that
Florida? That was here. It was locally. It was, I believe, it was in the northern part of the state.
Okay.
And she was charged.
Wow.
But we have a case there in D.C.
Right.
Where you have an officer shooting through a door.
Yep.
Without, and not just through a door now. You have if you remember the video, there's actually multiple separations. You have the door to the hall that the officers stand behind, and then there's a secondary door. And he shot her through those doors.
It's ridiculous.
And when you talk about that in essence of our cases, of stand your ground, that's not stand your ground.
Right.
Let's talk about, let me put my prosecutor hat on. If I was proseking that cop for those actions, is it stand your ground?
Yeah.
Did you have the reason to believe that she's going to commit a forcible felony? She's behind a door. She hasn't made entry. Was there an imminent fear of threat? Did she commit a crime that involved threat or serious bodily injury? So when you look at it in our legal terms, what he did, they determined that, he's justified. If he wasn't in that position, in that situation, or who he was as an officer, he probably would have been charged. Yeah. Because if you or I shot at somebody through a closed door, stand your ground doesn't apply.
Yeah.
Or the government would argue that stand your ground doesn't apply.
Yeah.
And I have cases now where my clients have tried to assert stand your ground, but they're in reasonable fear. And they've done a lot less than what this officer did. So is that the
threshold then, Anthony? Is it reasonable fear?
Reasonable fear of death, serious bodily injury, or the commission of a forcible felony. That's when you can use that deadly force.
Got it.
And it's really a crime of perception, or it's a defense of perception, because you're asking the court to put itself in the shoes of the defendant.
Right.
And did that defendant have reasonable fear? So if you look at Ashley Babbitt's situation, the officer who shot her, in our context, in a general context, would stand your ground apply? I would probably lose that stand your ground motion if I was representing an officer, or representing an individual who shot through a closed door.
Well, it goes right back to the Trayvon Martin too. We're talking with attorney Anthony Rickman here on the Consumer Quarterback Show. The guy's walking through the neighborhood. The other guy, whatever his name was, George maybe,
Floyd.
Yeah, or not George Floyd.
German, right?
Yeah, so he's following him, and the guy just the kid turns and just starts beating him, and he's an MMA guy. He's kicking his and he's on him, and he's like, so the guy reaches to his thing, leans back and shoots him.
Yeah. And look, and in that particular case, based upon the circumstances, based upon how he was being attacked, he had the right to use deadly force. And in that case, people think, he used stand your ground. He didn't even use stand your ground. They didn't file a stand your ground immunity motion in that particular case. They argued justifiable use of deadly force. Yeah. And in that, the government has to prove the defendant wasn't in reasonable fear. So when you go to a trial on an argument of self-defense, and I've tried cases in one case on self-defense. Right. The government has to prove in the alternative. The government has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he was not in reasonable fear. Right. And that force wasn't justified. Wow. And if you look at what happened in the Trayvon Martin case, is that the attorney was able to convince the jury that, hey, maybe even if he was possibly in fear, it's not enough. They had to believe beyond a reasonable doubt that there was not an imminent fear. Right. And in that particular case, based upon the circumstances, the fact that he's pinned down, getting beat up, had his nose broken. Remember seeing the bridge of his nose beat up, his eyes swollen. The jury found that based upon those circumstances, he was justified in shooting. Yep. And that makes sense, because one of those punches, you're out like a light. Now, what's he going to do? Slit your throat, take off? I mean, pull your gun, shoot it? I mean, there's to go anywhere. I represented criminal defendants accused of homicide for one punch. They're called one-punch cases. Wow. You punch one person, they fall back, they hit their head, they suffer a bleed in their brain, and they die. And now you're charged with second-degree murder based upon one punch. Yeah. And that could have happened to Zimmerman in the Trayvon Martin case. Right. It could have happened to the individual in the theater shooting. He got a cell phone thrown. The jury found him not guilty. Right. And they based it upon his reasonable belief. I want to explore that more on the other side. Remind me to touch on that. We're going to take a break here. More with attorney Anthony Rickman on the Consumer Quarterback Show. Check us out online at consumerqb.com and Rickman Law Firm as well. We'll be right back here. More with attorney Anthony Rickman, Consumer Quarterback Show, consumerqb.com.
Hey, this is Grant Cardone, and you've been listening to the phenomenal Brandon Rhymes, the Consumer Quarterback Show.
To get in touch with Brandon, call 727-263-3707. Online at consumerqb.com.
Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. They offer the very best nationwide coverage on 4G and 5G LTE networks and exceptional 100% U.S.-based customer support. Patriot Mobile offers discounts for veterans and first responders, NRA members, and families with multiple lines. Learn more at patriotmobile.com/consumerqb. That's patriotmobile.com 727-263-consumerqb. Or if you'd like to give us a call, you can reach out at 727-263-3707. That's 727-263-3707. And we'd be happy to tell you more about Patriot Mobile. Selling commercial, vacant land, or residential properties? Don't leave money on the table. List with the Platinum MVP team at Keller Williams Realty. I'm Brandon Rhymes. You can reach me at 727-263-3707. Call or text 727-263-3707. Online at consumerqb.com.
You're listening to the consumer quarterback, Brandon Rhymes, cutting through your typical media nonsense and offering you a rational and unbiased perspective on current events and life in Tampa Bay. Online at consumerqb.com.
All right, Brandon Rhymes, Consumer Quarterback Show, Platinum MVP team, Keller Williams Realty, Replenish IV Solutions, longtime friend of the Consumer Quarterback Show. Check out replenishivsolutions.com. Let them know the real estate quarterback sent you. Replenishivsolutions.com. Get vitamin infusions into your blood, boost your immunity. And we're back here in studio. Anthony Rickman in studio with us. Now, Anthony, right before the break, we were talking about the movie theater shooting. And so the victim essentially said, hey, you're using your phone. You shouldn't be using your phone. There was an argument that prevailed. How did you see that case?
Yeah, so in that case, actually the defendant, the person accused of murder, Curtis Reeves, was a police officer, and he was telling the person in front of him to put his phone down. And there was a verbal altercation, and the man turned around, pushed back Curtis Reeves, who was much older, threw his cell phone at him, and within a split second, he shot him.
Who threw the cell phone?
The alleged victim threw his cell phone at Reeves, who's the defendant, and based upon being hit with that phone, being pushed back, pinned back in his chair, he draws his weapon and shoots him.
Boom.
Kills him.
Wow.
In the movie theater. Unloads the weapon, sits in his chair, and law enforcement come. And ultimately, he argued a stand your ground motion.
Wow.
And lost. Went to trial, and then argued justifiable use of deadly force under self-defense and won. So in cases like this, where you have an argument where you use force because you feel it's necessary, you really have two bites of the apple. First bite of the apple is through immunity. And what that means is that under Florida law, you shouldn't have been arrested. You shouldn't have been prosecuted because you had no duty to retreat. That's stand your ground.
Got it.
Meet force with force, including deadly force, if you have the reason to believe you're going to be killed, injured seriously, or the victim of a forcible felony.
Felony.
You make that argument in front of a judge.
Got it.
And if you lose that argument, you can then make it again at trial through to the jury. And I had a case where my client was a U.S. Marine, and he had people breaking into his house. And he saw them running away. His girlfriend was in the house. She was afraid they were going to try and hurt her or rape her. And he got into his car to find them, to report, hopefully, eventually report it to law enforcement.
You had to follow him. Yep.
Followed him. But when he followed him, he took his AR-15 with him, which he lawfully was allowed to carry.
Yep.
And these individuals, upon seeing him, approached his vehicle, got into his window, got into his space, started pointing into the vehicle, started making threats to him. At one point in time, the now deceased individual grabs the firearm, puts it in his mouth, and says, "I'm not afraid to die, are you?"
Wow.
And he starts pulling the firearm.
Wow.
And as he's pulling, my client sees him reach, and my client shoots him and kills him.
Wow.
And he was charged with a second-degree murder. And that's, a case like that is one of those cases that, for me as a defense attorney, really is one that keeps me going, because it shows I really represented somebody who was innocent and somebody who used force that was necessary to save himself and his girlfriend. Yeah. And ultimately, in that case, after a week-long trial, he's found not guilty.
Wow.
And we argued that based upon all the circumstances, the fact that the alleged victim was on methamphetamine, the alleged victim was aggressive, the alleged victim was reaching into his car, grabbing the firearm, attempting to either disarm him or even reach for a knife, which eventually was found on this individual, he was justified in shooting. And the jury found him not guilty, even though a judge originally, under the old standard of law, found that stand your ground didn't apply.
Wow.
And he was in his vehicle. They came to his car, and he had the right to carry and possess. So, we tell these stories because there's a threshold of when you can defend yourself, and you can defend yourself. You can use that deadly force if you have the reasonable belief to do it.
Yeah.
And we talk about it in a stand your ground context. There's no duty to retreat. In a self-defense context, in stand your ground as long as you're not doing anything illegal, right?
Okay.
You can't start the fight and then shoot somebody.
Of course.
You can't be involved in a robbery and then shoot somebody because they took the gun. That's not stand your ground. It's not self-defense.
Right.
But if you're doing something lawfully in a place where you have the right to be,
yep.
You have no duty to retreat. And then it came from Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was one of the greatest orators or legal minds. And the theory was, should you stand there idly with someone unsheathe their sword? And really the answer is no.
Right.
Is that you shouldn't stand there when someone takes out their weapon.
Yeah.
You have the right to meet force if
Right.
you have reason to believe to use it. Now we have constitutional carry in the state of Florida.
Yeah.
And I see a lot more shooting cases, but I also see a lot more cases where people are being justified, found justified either by the courts or a jury for using that force, and that force necessary to protect them or protect somebody else. And it doesn't just apply in shootings or killings. Standard ground applies to any time you're using force. Whether, let's say hypothetically, you're driving down the street and you see someone being raped or sexually battered or beat up. You have the right to use that force to protect that person as well from being the victim of a forcible felony.
Right.
And the question is whether it's deadly or non-deadly. In deadly force, it has to be something you'd be likely to cause a death or serious injury to another. Non-deadly is if you see force being used on somebody. Then if you see somebody being robbed and they're being beat up, you have the right to defend that person, defense of others. So when you talk
Good
about
Samaritan type protection there.
Yeah, and there's protections. The courts and the law provides protections to citizens who lawfully either use their fists or weapons to protect themselves or others.
Yeah. We're talking with Anthony Rickman, criminal defense attorney right here in Tampa Bay. I meant to ask you about that. If you've seen an uptick in crime, an uptick in violent crime because of this open southern border. We all know it's been open. It's ridiculous that it's not closed. It's just a treasonous, in my opinion, what the left is doing. But this open border, have you seen an uptick in gang activity, in these shootings, and these types of robberies?
Yeah, I think we all have seen it throughout the country, not just here in Florida. And I'll tell you right now, in Hillsborough County, our law enforcement, our state attorney's office is doing an excellent job in stopping crime. We know that there's issues in this county, in this jurisdiction, with gangs, with guns, with violence, and what I see is a lot of it is younger kids. 18, 19, 15, 14. The Ybor shooting. They're kids walking around at 14 years old in Ybor with guns. And what our state attorney, Susie Lopez, and what the prosecutors and law enforcement is doing is that they're trying to crack down to get these individuals to stop it before it happens. When we talk about the open borders and the federal system, we do see. I was in federal court the other day, and there's an influx of cases where people who aren't U.S. citizens are coming into this country with the intent or the sole purpose of committing crimes. Yeah. And we do see a lot more cases like this.
Yeah, it's sad to see. I mean, you see the fentanyl, the drug, the violence. It's just the numbers are blowing up and exploding. Just this past week, was it New York that they told kids, "Oh, you can't go to school, kids. We got to throw a bunch of illegals in the gymnasium." Yeah,
I mean, you talk about fentanyl. I mean, it's coming across the Mexican border, and it's killing people. And I see so many drug cases now where it's the root of his fentanyl. People think they're taking cocaine. They think they're taking marijuana. They think they're taking a pill. And it's not. It's
or
fentanyl
ecstasy or something,
and it's killing them.
Yeah.
And people have to be careful.
Yeah, it really is. It's a man. What a sad time in our country that we seem to be living in 2024 here at this culmination of all of these evil forces coming together. Man, it really is.
Yeah, and a lot of times I'm on the side of that. Right. My job is to represent people accused of crimes that they didn't commit, and a lot of times crimes that the government can prove, and our goal in those cases is to get the best results for our clients. Right. Because everyone is presumed innocent. Everyone's entitled to a criminal defense. People ask you, how can you do it? Well, I can do it because of the guys like I just told you about with the AR-15 case.
The most famous case of history is John Adams, right?
John Adams.
He had to represent
the people, the shooters in the Boston Massacre.
Yeah. Because
everybody had a right to trial, and those shooters in the Boston Massacre had the right to defend themselves.
They were in the right. Yep. They were in the right at that case. Yep. And that's great. Hey, look, that's where justice should be in this country. It shouldn't be the attacks against Trump and all of these crazy cases against Trump. I mean, unbelievable.
When you talk about it, with John Adams, facts are stubborn things that are our thoughts, our wishes, our indulgence, our passions. You can't change the facts.
I love it.
And that's what, unfortunately, the media tries to do.
Exactly.
Facts are the facts. And we'll close it up with that. So that's
exactly.
what it is. And as defense attorneys, that's what we do. We look at the facts. And at the end of the day, the facts don't prove the case.
That's right. Just look at Kyle Rittenhouse and all the on and on and on, these types of stories. Anthony Rickman, criminal defense attorney, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Hey, another great show. We had Michael Johnson on the front end, Denison Yachting. Check out that boat show coming up on the 18th. And, of course, go to Anthony's website. Check him out as well. Anthony Rickman Law is the company there as well. Go out there, make it another great day. Please commit that random act of kindness and do something kind for one another. We'll see you next time. Consumer Quarterback Show, consumerqb.com.
You've been listening to The Consumer Quarterback, Brandon Rhymes.